We're going to be talking today about the kind of importance of cultivating an appreciation of beauty. So I'll just say, so in the first week, we talked about how beauty can refine and expand our consciousness. And last week we talked a little bit about how we could see beauty as a kind of path of insight, and also, well, as a kind of way in which we could use beauty to kind of hold all of our practice. Yeah. And I wanted to just go back to actually something I said in the first week. I quoted Sangharakshita, and in his book, The Three Jewels, he recalls a Theravadan monk saying, "I'm afraid that being a monk, I'm not allowed to appreciate beauty." And yeah, I just thought we'd explore that a little bit, and also the Buddha talked about not being bound by the 5 ropes of sensual pleasure, and I just thought it was worth kind of exploring how we kind of square these different kind of aspects. So Bhante makes it very clear that we need beauty and pleasure in our life. Otherwise, it just becomes very uninspiring. So the point is not that we should let go of the kind of pleasure and beauty in our lives, but really what we should be doing is looking for that beauty at a higher level. Yeah, and in a way, this is about sort of gradually refining our being, so we become less dependent for pleasure on the realm of kind of sense desire, the karma loka, or another way of putting it is, is that we look less for pleasure from things like, food or what we own and things like that, and instead we begin to find pleasure in kind of aesthetic appreciation, in the arts, in meditation, in sort of positive emotions like metta, the beauty of the natural world, or friendship, or just kind of simple things that we can kind of enjoy with a kind of an appreciative awareness. Yeah, and I was going to read a poem, one of Bante's poems out, actually, because it just sort of it just shows the kind of link between the Dharma and beauty, and in this particular poem, he's talking about emptiness or shunyata as well. And the poem is called "The Unseen Flower," and compassion is far more than emotion. It is something that springs up in the emptiness, which is when you yourself are not there, so that you do not know anything about it. Nobody, in fact, knows anything about it. If they knew it, it would not be compassion. But they can only smell the scent of the unseen flower that blooms in the heart of the void. Yeah. So in one of Bante's books, Wisdom Beyond Words, he recounts the following story. He says, "One evening when I was living in Kalimpong, I was out for a walk and saw an enormously tall, beautiful pine tree growing at the side of the road. As I stood admiring it, a Nepalese friend came along. "Just look at this tree," I exclaimed. "Isn't it magnificent?" "Oh yes," he replied. "There must be enough firewood for the whole winter." And there's just something I really like about this story. So Sangharakshita is kind of stood there in wonder at the beauty of the tree, and his friend comes along, and he sees it. He just sees it as firewood for the coming winter. And I think this captures something really interesting about different ways in which we can perceive the world. And Sangharakshita talks about arranging our lives within a kind of overall context of aesthetic appreciation. So, in a way, life involves, well, possibly quite a lot of kind of practical kind of stuff, like work or caring for children or caring for others, just the kind of practicalities of living and having a home. But he asked the question about how can we live with a greater sense of aesthetic appreciation and more of a non-utilitarian attitude to life. So utilitarian means something that is designed to be useful or practical rather than attractive. And I say that because we're going to kind of come back to that thing. But it's just quite easy, I think, for us to inhabit a realm of the kind of practical. We're all generally busy. There's a lot of things to do, and it's just very kind of easy for us to kind of live a life which is kind of dominated by the kind of practicalities of life. And also, I think there's a sense in which being busy and doing can be a kind of way of reinforcing the self. It's this kind of idea that somehow I'm a useful person. And I guess the question then becomes how can we let our life be transformed by beauty, nature, friendship, appreciation and love. So Bhante talks about being able to live within what he calls a mandala of aesthetic appreciation. And I'll just say briefly what a mandala is. We can see a mandala as a kind of representation of a kind of collection of different elements that make up a whole. So in a way, we can represent or look at our life as a kind of mandala made up of the various different bits. So we might have our job, family, our practice, all the kind of different aspects of our life that go together to create this kind of mandala. So Sangharakshita says, we can think of ourselves as living within a greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation, in which the fulfillment of needs and wants occupy just a tiny corner. The real values are aesthetic, not utilitarian. So, he's just making this point, isn't it? That the real values which are important are kind of aesthetic values and not the kind of practical utilitarian values. and it's very this sort of this tendency to see the world in very sort of practical terms, I think is just strong in the culture that we live in. This kind of sense that we need to be being productive, and that everything must have a purpose. It always reminds me of the phrase, "If you snooze, you lose." But there's just something. There's just something of that in the kind of culture we live in, and it's all also possible to see other people in this kind of utilitarian way as well. You know, the idea that someone is useful to me because, and in a way, this is a great shame. Well, it's a tragedy in a way. It's a bit like making everyone we come into contact with the kind of neutral person from our metta bhavana. Yeah. So yeah, I think we can kind of get sort of caught in this place where everything must kind of have a use or be kind of explainable or rational as well. So we also live in this very kind of scientific world. I'm going to read a short passage from a Charles Dickens book, actually, Hard Times, that some of you, I'm sure, will know. And I really like this passage because the book has this theme of fact versus fancy, and the book is very much kind of on the side of fact as being the kind of mode from which we should kind of operate, and fancy is seen as like the imagination, the kind of aesthetic, and our kind of creative side, and so the book is very much it's set against the background of the Industrial Revolution, with the kind of transition from people kind of living with the kind of rhythm of nature to living by the factory clock, and it just has this sense of how people become part of the machine. So hopefully a slide with this quote will come up. I've got a feeling that the slides may be in the they may be in an incorrect order, actually, so you might need to skip through a couple. That's it. Thank you. Okay. Now, what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. Stick to facts, sir. The speaker and the schoolmaster all backed a little and swept with their eyes the inclined plane of little vessels, then and there arranged in order, ready to have imperial gallons of facts poured into them until they were full to the brim. The speaker was Thomas Gradgrind, sir, a man of reality, a man of facts and calculations, a man who proceeds upon the principle that 2 and 2 are 4 and nothing over, and who is not to be talked into allowing for anything over. Thomas Gradgrind, with a rule and a pair of scales and the multiplication tables always in his pocket, sir, ready to weigh and measure any parcel of human nature and tell you exactly what it comes to. It is a mere question of figures, a case of simple arithmetic. So, yeah, and then there's another, a little further on in the book, there's a lovely passage where one of the pupils, Sissy, is interrogated by Gradgrind, and her father works in a circus, and she wants to work with horses, and this is regarded as kind of frivolous. And Gradgrind demands that she defines a horse for him. And there's just this kind of sense that everything, everything in life can be kind of reduced to facts and kind of measurements. Yeah. So anyway, coming back to the mandala of aesthetic appreciation. I think we also have this tendency to see our kind of engagement with the aesthetic as a kind of subset of our life, sort of something we bolt on and perhaps do when we've got time or something. And I guess the question is, can we bring that sort of sense of the aesthetic to all the aspects of our life? Yeah. And I think it's a good question, isn't it? How do we do that? And if not, how do we do it? And I often think of my work, actually, where I work with sort of members of the public. And in a way, it's very easy for me to see the people who come in and see me as just a kind of endless stream of people that I kind of need to deal with. But on the other hand, it can be a real opportunity for me to connect, just to connect with another being and really help them. And I think, it's a bit like I can see work as a way of making enough money so that I can get what I need, or I can see it as a kind of act of kindness towards and a kind of an appreciation of others. And I think there's just something here about what are the values that we are really kind of serving in our lives. I'll come back a little bit and perhaps say a bit more about that. So Sangharakshita talks about the Bodhisattva as living within this kind of mandala, or this kind of aesthetic mandala. And it's just very interesting. So he describes how the Bodhisattva is very busy. I mean, after all, they're kind of there trying to liberate all beings, and it's very kind of hard and practical work. And they're just sort of constantly doing what needs to be done. But it's said that they regard all this activity as play. And I think what this reflects is they just have a kind of appreciation of life. And this play of helping others, it is a kind of expression of life itself. And it's not kind of frivolous, but it's just like kind of opening up to the kind of possibilities of life, and really sort of bringing themselves fully to every situation. Okay, I just wanted to say something also about the kind of aesthetic aspect of awareness. So Bhante talks about true awareness not merely being an understanding of the characteristics of something, but he talks about it very much having this kind of appreciative quality. And just to quote him, he says, it's a sort of relishing it, a being in tune with it, being on the same wavelength as it, being in harmony with it, even, you could say, not just knowing it. Yeah, we're gonna look a bit more about this kind of the beauty of awareness next week. But just to say a little bit more, the Sanskrit word for ignorance is avidya, and the opposite is vidya, which is usually translated as knowledge. And but in his book Wisdom Beyond Words, Sangharakshita translates this this word vidya as aesthetic appreciation. And he also talks about how wisdom itself has this sense of seeing everything all the time with this kind of quality of aesthetic appreciation. And in a way, this explains how the Bodhisattva is just able to kind of dwell in this kind of mandala. It's through this kind of quality of wisdom, and kind of wisdom imbued with this kind of aesthetic appreciation that enables him to do that. Yeah. And normally, of course, well, in a way, this makes sense, doesn't it? Because when we see with wisdom, we see something just as it is. You know, we kind of appreciate it for both its uniqueness and its sameness. And when we see through with kind of ignorance, in a way, we're looking at something through the lens of kind of craving and aversion, and we very quickly get into this kind of idea of this is something I like, or this is something I don't like. Yeah. So yeah, so coming back to the question, can we bring this appreciative awareness to the different aspects of our life, and can we find more enjoyment in the kind of practical kind of aspects of life. So when we see something from this kind of utilitarian point of view, in a way we are relating to it from need. It's like the chap with the firewood, isn't it? He has a need, and that's what he sees a tree in relation to that need. Yeah. Whereas you know, Bante was able to see it as something of beauty, and something that, of course, exists in its own right. Yeah. So the Bodhisattva, you know, he doesn't need to acquire anything, does he? And therefore he just has this kind of aesthetic appreciation for things. Yeah. And I think when we have that kind of relationship to sort of objects and others, it just makes it just makes things very small. Yeah, it's like the object just becomes something. It's kind of limited to fulfilling what we want. It just becomes like, well, yeah, it becomes like a pile of firewood rather than a beautiful tree. So Bante says, we should not seek to use things, but enjoy them, appreciate them, feel for them. And there's a little poem that I was just going to share. It's a William Blake poem, which hopefully will pop up. Well, I'll yeah. Thank you. So many of you will be familiar with this poem called Eternity. He who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. I always think of this poem describing a butterfly or something, something that we can only own by killing it. And this poem has this sense, doesn't it, that we grasp at experience and then we miss it. It's like when we grasp at something, an element or an aspect of it is lost. And I guess it sort of raises the question, sort of, can we bring that kind of ungraspable quality that beauty and the truth have? Can we bring those qualities to our life and kind of live within that kind of sense of aesthetic appreciation? Yeah. And when we're, I think when we're less driven by the need to kind of see things in a kind of practical and useful way, then there's a kind of freeing up of the imagination, and it allows it kind of allows our creativity to sort of come out, and it also sort of just brings qualities like metta to the fore. And of course, as well as viewing things, the world in this kind of utilitarian way, we can also, there's also a tendency to do that with ourselves, isn't there, I think? And this is something again that Sangha was very keen on, and I'm just going to read another quote of his. He said, "You don't have to justify your existence by being useful. You yourself are the justification for your existence. You haven't come into existence after all these millions of years of evolution just to sit down in front of a typewriter or to keep accounts. You are the justification of that whole process. You are an end in yourself. All you can really be said to be here for is to develop into some kind of higher form of human life, to become a bodhisattva, to become a Buddha. So don't be ashamed about sitting around and doing nothing. Glory in it. Do something spontaneously out of a state of inner satisfaction and achievement. It is a virtue to be an ornament as well as useful." Yeah. So I think that there's quite a sort of strong statement, but there's something just about sort of how we appreciate ourselves for just who we are. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to say a little bit more about. I'm just going to say something about what are we serving in our lives. So I think what we make central to our life, or what we put in the center of our mandala, impacts how we see the world. And of course, how we see the world has a very significant impact on what we create. And there's this idea that a beautiful mind creates a beautiful world. And I guess it comes back to this idea about whether we can bring that sort of ungraspable quality of beauty that beauty and truth have, and kind of make them more central to our lives. And perhaps the way we do this is through the Dharma. The Buddha said, many of you will be familiar with this, but the Buddha said, the Dharma is beautiful at the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful at the end. And just to have one final thought from Bhante, he said, if our deeper and more powerful emotions are still tied up with things of a worldly nature, our involvement with the Dharma can only be superficial, however sincere we may be. If we are to be truly Buddhist, our involvement with the Dharma must be truly passionate. Yeah, so I think that perhaps the theme of this, everything I've said actually, is perhaps just about moving our kind of center of gravity away from the kind of mundane to the dharmic or the transcendental, and just seeing if we can see the world through this kind of lens of aesthetic appreciation and kind of appreciative awareness. And I think if we can do that, it's just like something opens up, and we can see, we can just kind of engage more fully in the beauty of friendship or nature, meditation, the arts. Yeah. And I think there's a sort of underlying theme through this about just being able to kind of appreciate life and people and things for themselves without them without everything needing to kind of serve a purpose. Yeah. Okay, so that is everything. That's everything I've got to say.